VideoGameVegas.
He's so cute.
Friends, Video Game Vegas. And does anyone remember when Las Vegas, that entertainment utopia in Nevada, didn't feel like a scam? I remember the first time I experienced this grand city, taken in by all its over-the-top and robust experiences, the exuberant welcoming atmosphere from everyone that greeted and served at every restaurant, shop, and hotel, who crafted catering to guests down to a T, making each experience exceptional. I have so many fond memories of Las Vegas, and it's greatly saddened me to witness its steady and methodical descent into the massive fleece factory it is today. Las Vegas went from a place that I loved, enjoying over-the-top attractions, boundless magical lightscapes, and eating at some of the most amazing restaurants in the world, to an outright greedy corporate con, where everyone spends more to get less, where hidden fees and microtransactions are the rule of the day, and where its one strong emphasis towards hospitality is mostly an irrelevant afterthought. I felt it important to make this video because the word Vegas appears in my YouTube channel name. I didn't want what Las Vegas has turned into to inadvertently tarnish my image. Now, I in no way think that the Las Vegas of today stains me as an actual person. I'm more than a simple identifier out here in cyberspace. But I personally don't want people to associate my persona and content with what Las Vegas has become. My first visit to Las Vegas was back in 1999. I wanted to see one of its newest attractions at the time, Star Trek: The Experience, a movie ride with a themed restaurant and bar, immersing fans in the famous universe now outside of the screen. It was a wonderful time for the city, full of arcades at almost every property on the Strip, other movie ride experiences taking you to more unreal fantasies, like Race for Atlantis at the Caesar's Palace and In Search of the Obelisk at the Luxor. So many geek-tastic escapes to explore, and all with the near-perfect balance of price to quality. And the hospitality? Off the chain. Now, I'm not talking about people greeting you at the airport to place flowered leis around your neck, but everywhere I went, people exuded an excitement for you to be there. A Las Vegas sort of charm, if you will. It was almost like a show in itself. So much attention by everyone to make sure you were having a great time. And tipping well, actually felt fantastic, like something you couldn't wait to do. I know it sounds crazy, but I've rarely experienced that level of service, and Las Vegas had it down to an art form. I've made so many treks to this amazing city, 19 in fact, I know, a lot. And I have to say the cracks really started to show around the year 2006, though there were still signs here and there before that, where things slowly and sneakily started to change. I first noticed this at Star Trek: The Experience, my pilgrimage each time I visited. The main line where people would stand to get onto the attraction was adorned with amazing memorabilia that people could look at while waiting. This was all before the smartphone boom, so it was a brilliant idea, making the wait feel less, weighty. And people who weren't riding could also walk through it and look at all the cool stuff. One visit, I remember seeing the line roped off with a sign stating that it was now a quote-unquote museum, and you'd have to pay $10 just to see it. Seriously? $10 to have the privilege of looking at stuff in a line for a ride without getting to ride the actual ride? And the prices for the actual attraction seemed to go up every time I visited as well, from around $20 when I first went, to eventually inching up to around $45, all over a very short period of time, jumping up around every 6 months or so. And the number of cast members they had play parts in the attractions dwindled over time as well. One of the last times I rode, There wasn't even a single person on the bridge of the Enterprise, except the person walking us through to point us to a turbo lift. And on the Borg invasion ride, one cast member had to pretend a Borg was pulling him away. It was kind of funny at the time, but in hindsight, it was actually quite depressing. Some actors even scrambling to play multiple parts. And when the attraction eventually closed its doors, though sad, it wasn't a surprise. And stuff like that was happening all around the town. Once free entertainment to draw people into properties, now being removed or monetized. I remember going into a Ferrari shop at the Wynn to see some amazing cars for free, as well as a Lamborghini shop at the Palazzo and an exotic car showroom in the Caesars Palace Mall. Mere months later, they were all charging $10 a pop to see the cars. Really? And in the case of Caesars, the number of cars on show decreased once the pay model was enacted. So essentially, you are now paying money to see less than what you got to see for free. Ridiculous. By 2008, I was also noticing a sharp decline in deals and discounts. I remember every time I landed in Las Vegas, picking up every free magazine and pamphlet I could find to stretch and expand my fund with the funds I had. Free this, half off that, buy one, get one. Passing by avenues and people handing out all sorts of perks, excluding the adult content kind, of course. It was a cornucopia of value, and for those willing to take the time to look, they reaped the extra benefits. But all of that seemingly vanished overnight, from one trip to the very next, in fact, and it never seemed to come back. Scouring deeper, I still found a few places advertising things identified as quote-unquote deals, but they often weren't. Visiting Las Vegas as much as I did, I easily spotted tactics to hike up normal pricing and then offer the older original full price as some sort of deal. Now, I'm not daft enough to think that there isn't such a thing as inflation, but price manipulation in such identical ways, in so many places, without any sort of nuance, made it feel like a deliberate squeeze to get as much as they could while offering you as little as possible. And if it was just price increases, I might have been more apt to give it a pass. But oh boy, things were about to get much worse. Enter the world of hidden, junk, unnecessary, and made-up fees. Now, stuff like this had existed way before many facets of Las Vegas started to employ them. But with Las Vegas being known as, and rightfully earned status at the time, best bang for your buck destination, having them creep ever so deviously and seemingly non-stop into every facet of activity became grueling. Adding extra charges on the back end of purchases became the rule of the day, making the unobservant think that they would be paying one price, but actually paying more than what was originally presented. True bait and switch at its finest. But why not? As mobile devices became a prevalent way of life, people were already used to getting duped by cellular carriers, enticed by plan deals, only to soon find out they'd be paying much more after the random fees were applied. And because so many became dependent on their smartphones, paying pretty much anything to keep using their Jesus devices, other businesses now had their reel in to normalize this practice under their products and services as well. And though we sometimes see pushback at the beginning of new tactics, if not enough people say enough is enough and put those feelings into real action, then time eventually wins out, getting people so used to the corrupt idea that it just becomes normal and acceptable. But getting back to Las Vegas proper, the most egregious tactic, for me, was the dreaded resort fee. I was blindsided by this one, folks. And here was my first introduction, or should we call it what it really is, indoctrination. I had booked one of my vacations on a site called Travelocity.com. I got a really great deal, as I often did, and made my way to Las Vegas. When I got to the hotel, I couldn't believe what was about to happen. The hotel clerk checking me in said she needed my credit card so they could charge me the daily fee. I let her know I wouldn't be using anything extra, as I assumed this was the reason, so they wouldn't have to charge me. I was told this was a fee every guest has to pay as standard. I let her know I had already paid for everything in full, so I was confused on why I was being charged something extra. I asked what the fee was for. She looked at me with a puzzled look. I could see she was trying to come up with something, but then told me her manager could explain it best. The manager arrived and said, "I hear you have some questions about the resort fee." I said yes and asked what it was for. He said, "It's actually for all the incidentals provided by the hotel." I asked what these incidentals were. He seemed a bit befuddled at first, but then eventually said, "Oh, things like the fitness center, and we also have free Wi-Fi you could use." I thought to myself, free? If I'm paying for it, how is that free? I let him know I wouldn't be using either, and asked him if we could waive the fee. He said they couldn't, and that every guest was required to pay it. It was an additional $20 a day. I let him know I had already paid for my stay in full, so there shouldn't be anything extra. I pulled out my itinerary, which I always printed out, and showed it to him. As he could see, the room had been completely paid for, and there was nothing about any extra charges, nothing about a resort fee. He explained to me it wasn't the hotel's responsibility for what is or isn't listed on a third-party site, and I would have to take that up with Travelocity. He said if I didn't want to pay the fee, I was welcome to stay at a different hotel. I thought, did this guy just really say that to a customer? I said, "So you'll give me a refund, and will you also help me book a room at another hotel?" He said no, we'll just cancel your reservation and you can contact Travelocity and work out any refunds and bookings with them. He then said, "Just be aware, many hotels are booked up right now because of the conventions." He knew he had me over a barrel, so I did begrudgingly give him my credit card to charge the random daily fee. And little did I know at the time, a lot of Las Vegas hotels were now charging this random fee. Now, eventually, sites like Travelocity were made to publish, in very small print mind you, the resort fees on their site, but they were never calculated in your payment on the site, nor did those fees appear in the pricing for the hotels you saw. And the resort fees, though I feel the worst, were just the tip of the iceberg in this microtransaction shit sandwich. Rent-a-car companies then started piling on extra fees. Parking at strip properties now incurred their own charges. Free parking became an endangered species. Using a credit card to pay for a taxi? Here's your convenience fee. Shows and attractions adding their own bogus fees, like booking, handling, and any other random titles they could come up with. Restaurants and bars slipping in their own extra charges near each tax line on a receipt. Some even adding in what was akin to a full tip, taking the choice away from the customer of what they might or might not want to leave. And you best believe, as a wise consumer who keeps his eyes open to avoid getting randomly screwed, I'll be looking at the fine print on menus and restaurant advertisements to scope out any hidden fees and other unprincipled tactics. And I also don't have any problem asking a host or hostess about these either, requesting to waive them if there are any. It seems you can't go anywhere in Las Vegas where the price shown is what you'll actually pay. And if prices and unscrupulous fees weren't bad enough, hospitality, heck, even the bare minimum customer service is almost a complete joke at times. More and more staff at hotels, venues, attractions, services, and even some at restaurants seem more interested on what's on their smartphones than doing their actual job. Some even resort to rudeness when they're forced to look up from their tiny screens. Now, I get that everyone has a bad day now and again, but when the majority starts consistently having a bad day every time I visit, or sheer apathy to even serve the customer, something they're paid to do, that's a problem. But oh yes, those same people are still more than willing to stick their hand out for a tip. And when I do tip, I'm finding more acting dismissive, like tipping is some sort of requirement or a given. And I'm well aware of the argument and situation that some people rely on tips as part of their pay, and maybe some have been burned not receiving a tip after doing a great job and don't feel like they should have to put in an effort without guarantee. But anyone who agrees to a contract where tips, which are not guaranteed, make up part of their regular pay, takes full onus of that agreement. And taking it out on or acting apathetic to a customer is not an acceptable response. Gambling with earning a sustainable wage is a personal choice and a risky one. And I get that gambling is a staple of Las Vegas, but are you really willing to gamble with something that important? Demanding a fair wage that doesn't involve tips is something I think is worth fighting for. You can call me old-fashioned, and are more than welcome to your own scruples regarding tipping, but for me, tips are earned for those who provide good service, and maybe a bit more for doing something beyond what they normally do. And because of the sheer amount of indifference, or just plain bad service I've experienced in Las Vegas the last several times I've visited, the Vegas way, tipping no matter what, is no longer on my menu. And thankfully, just like I set strict and fixed gambling limits for myself, I'll now be doing the same for tipping. My new tipping strategy is simple. No tipping, or adjusted lower tipping for those who do go the extra mile, until all my acquired extra fees are balanced against and compensated for. What does that mean? Every time I would normally tip, and then don't tip to compensate for this fee culture, that amount will instead get subtracted from a balance of fees I incur and accrue. Here's a scenario. Let's say I go to Las Vegas for a 4-night stay, and the resort fee for the hotel is $45 a night on top of what I've already paid for the room. And I'm also not going to forget to factor in the taxes charged on the resort fee itself. And let's keep it simple for this example. Let's say it's an extra $5 in resort fee taxes per night. So that means, right from the jump, my fee balance for the trip starts at a total of $200. Now let's say I used to leave $5 a day on the pillow for the cleaning staff as a tip. I'll now be skipping that altogether, as I consider that, as the manager I mentioned before so eloquently put it, an incidental, and subtract that from the starting $200 fee deficit, now leaving a balance of $180. Now let's say the bellhop brings my bags up to the room, and I usually tip $5 a bag. I often bring 2 bags, so a $10 tip. But remember, I'm paying down the fee deficit. He just so happens to be very accommodating and extra nice that day, so I decide to at least give him a tip, but only half of what I would normally give, so I can continue to pay down my fee deficit. I give him $5 and subtract the other $5 I would have given, bringing my new fee balance down to $175. I then decide to take a taxi to another hotel to eat at a restaurant I made a reservation for, but I find out that there's an extra $10 surcharge fee for taxis that day because of some event, and that brings my fee balance back up to $185. I'm a bit miffed at that, and the taxi driver is just driving, doing nothing welcoming or extra, and I normally would give a $5 minimum tip for any kind of extra hospitality or service, but no tip here, bringing the fee balance back down to $180. I dine at the restaurant, which is very high-end, and I'm paying quite a bit of money for the meal. The service ends up being blah, and I can't get a drink refill to save my life for most of the evening, so I decide not to leave a tip at all. Let's say a 20% tip would have cost me $60. Subtracting that from my fee deficit, my new total to pay down is now $120. I think you can see how it works. And if I do happen to pay the fee deficit down to 0 at some point during my trip, then I'll go back to tipping as normal until a new fee arises. Though I'm happy with this new strategy, it still pains me a bit, because I actually like to tip for a job well done. I'm known amongst my friends as a generous tipper, where I usually tip between 20 to 50%, and on the very special occasion, 100%. There can also be an added fear when you don't tip or tip what may be expected, and a possible confrontation inquiring as to why. First of all, be honest, not brutally so or condescending. And regarding my strategy here, I'm going to say something to the effect of, all the arbitrary fees this trip have hit me pretty hard, and this affects my tip money. And if the service was just plain bad, and I didn't feel a tip was warranted, I'll just point out the reasons why, without being derogatory, and hopefully that will serve as good advice to consider in the future. I've heard some who cover Las Vegas on the regular warn if you don't tip, people will remember and give you less, bad, or no service at times, or affect a possible next time. But is that really an absolute or the norm? And how often does it really happen? I can tell you from my experience, in the handful of infrequent times I've been out with those who don't tip, I haven't noticed or seen it. People who I've heard claim this theory only seem to provide general hearsay or assumptions, and all without provable evidence to specific situations to back up their claims. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, and I can entertain maybe on a rare occasion, but in the long term, with so many people visiting Las Vegas every single day, I think it's highly unlikely someone's going to remember that one specific individual who didn't give them a tip and hold some kind of lifetime grudge. And by the off chance someone does remember, I think that's actually a good thing. The language many understand is money, and if enough people speak with their wallets, things can change. Rewarding people with tips for bad or substandard service only begs to see it continue. Just a couple other things that have gotten just plain worse in Las Vegas over time. I've mostly tried to avoid staying in Las Vegas on Friday and Saturday nights due to hotels spiking in prices. Vegas pitched itself when I first started going as a 24/7 vacation experience, and though some areas that may be true, the number of activities I enjoy have drastically dwindled over the years, especially more during the later hours, with some now unavailable on certain days. Unless you like to gamble, drink, or club, Vegas is not a 24-hour spot. Many malls, shops, and attractions close earlier and earlier every time I visit, especially on weekdays. And some places, even restaurants, simply don't open on certain days. Yet the prices of almost everything in Las Vegas keep going up, while the things I like to do keep diminishing or going away. And we gotta talk on how outside on the Strip has devolved into a truly scummy experience, now rivaling places like downtown Manhattan in New York and Hollywood Boulevard in California. Outside on the Strip used to be a great place to hang out and stroll down, taking in the sheer magnificence of all the grand Las Vegas hotels, though there were a few porn peddlers here and there trying to hand out nudie cards. It's now given way to mass gatherings of panhandlers, either asking you directly for money, attempting to coax you into some sort of illegal gambling game, trying to hand you their supposed latest music CD, selling bottles of water probably filled from a tap, or coming up to you dressed as some sweaty, smelly Super Mario or SpongeBob for a photo op. In fact, the last time I went out, I was physically grabbed by someone and attempted handcuffing, telling me I was her prisoner, obviously to get me to take a picture with her with my camera and then pay her for it. And though she was dressed in a really sexy low-cut police officer costume, quite an attractive gal, this whole new side of aggressiveness took things to a level I never thought possible. And though there are some legit street performers among all the mess, they're often drowned out by the overwhelming number of pretenders who get more belligerent and hostile every time I go. Even on my last visit, there was someone who started yelling and insulting me when I wouldn't give him any money. Luckily, I had some friends with me, but that's not always the case. And don't get what I'm saying twisted. Everyone has just as much right to be on the strip as anyone else. I just don't like the increased apprehension and feeling unsafe as people get more emboldened, trying to vie for people's money. And the Nevada government doesn't seem to care, as the situation just keeps getting worse. This, and the other reasons I mentioned, and even more I could mention, are why I decreased the amount of times I visit Las Vegas. And the false narratives and excuses need to stop as well, especially the one regarding the decline in gambling in Las Vegas affecting everything else. If this is even remotely true, and due to other places and avenues that now have legal gambling, then Las Vegas casinos put themselves in this situation. Instead of competing in the gambling space, providing more enticing reasons to drop coin in Sin City, they went the exact opposite direction. Las Vegas casinos continually come up with more and more ludicrous ways to make the already horrible gambling odds even worse. Extra zeros on roulette wheels, removing easier to understand slot machines for ones with ridiculously complex rule sets and an ever-increasing amount of reels, adding more and more decks to card games, making minimum bets so high that the word minimum seems laughable. I could go on and on. Services like the free drink while gambling are now deliberately regulated to be so scarce that even after an hour of dumping hundreds of dollars into a slot machine, didn't even net me one libation. And don't get me started on the money ticket redemption machines when you want to cash out, that won't dispense the coin denominations. So if you want anything after the dollar decimal point, you'll need to go to a cashier cage to get it, and most likely have to stand in line. And what happens if you don't cash that change out? Well, the casinos get to literally nickel and dime skim it off the top for their own profits. So contemptible. Making gambling less desirable in Las Vegas is all on the casinos, and don't let anyone else gaslight you otherwise. And let us not forget, quite possibly the silliest false narrative that I've heard, that somehow the World Health event that occurred in 2020 was the actual catalyst for all these problems. I haven't been back to Las Vegas since 2017, well before all that happened. Las Vegas's problems, at least the ones I've mentioned, started creeping in over a decade prior to 2020. Too many fanatics keep justifying the ills of Big Corp, either trying to convince people that this is normal, or what's happening should be expected, or just trying to desperately hold on to some semblance of good times they remember from one of Las Vegas's past heydays. But the reality of right now is, value and respect for the customer in Las Vegas is a fallacy. I won't deny that there are many tourist destinations, some cruises, and other places like some large theme parks that offer way worse value than Las Vegas. One case in point, Disney theme parks, who take anti-consumer tactics that Vegas only dabbles in comparison to a whole other disgusting level. The House of Mouse uses overly convoluted pricing to manipulate people to spend more than what they bargained for, lest they miss out on things that any sane person would think would be included in the already ridiculous price of admission, then implement excessively complicated rule structures to deliberately confuse people in navigating their experience, and parsing so many once understood included things now into additional micro-purchases, as well as background charging exorbitant amounts of money for general convenience and the ability to do and see it all. And that's not even broaching Disney's crusade to push false and evil ideologies onto youth, which is a whole other rabbit hole that I won't be diving into here. Just because Las Vegas may still be a better value or not as bad as some other places, doesn't mean it's a good or fair value. Being the lesser of two evils isn't something to celebrate or be proud of. I may not be the biggest fan of Las Vegas at this time, but it doesn't mean that I don't hope for things to get better in the future. Las Vegas has always been about change, but what kind of future change will we see? Good or bad? The people in charge and the customers spending their money will ultimately determine that course. Now, do I want to go to Las Vegas again? I do. I'm actually excited to see the new Sphere and visit the new location of one of my favorite haunts, the Pinball Hall of Fame. I feel comfortable going out at least one more time, especially having the strategies in place I've come up with, like my new tipping approach, to balance the unscrupulous business practices I come across. But will I start going back to Vegas on the regular? I don't think so. At least not until real change happens. Real good change. Thank you for listening to my stories and thoughts on Las Vegas, and I hope you found it entertaining, and maybe even a little bit helpful. I hope if you do love this town, that it keeps bringing you joy throughout many more years to come. And with that, safe travels everyone. And remember, you always have a right to your opinion, but only I have a right to mine. Until next time, be wiggly, my friends.